today from Marla Cartwright, who is from the Kaplan University. And so I'm going to turn the floor over to Marla at this time and let her share with us all the information that she has. Thank you for taking the time to speak today, Marla, and to share with us. We are so glad that you are with us.
Thanks so much, and I appreciate you guys having me. So yes, my name is Marla Cartwright. I'm a faculty developer with the Center for Teaching and Learning at Kaplan University Online. And just to give you some background, I'm located in East Tennessee, and I've been a full-time virtual employee for over 16 years. I've been in higher education for over 20 years, and I've served in various roles as an online adjunct instructor, as a full-time online instructor, as an online department chair, and currently as a faculty developer. And essentially what we do is we train faculty for the online environment. I've been with Kaplan University Online for almost a decade, and that experience has really provided me with some really good opportunities to both do research and put into practice good online teaching strategies. So today I'm going to share with you some effective discussion board strategies for the online environment. And I'm really comfortable in online presentations, so if you want to throw questions up in the chat, that's completely fine. If I need to go back to some slides or skip ahead, I really look at these as conversations, really, rather than me just being a talking head up here. So feel free to just throw questions up there, and we will stop and discuss. So first of all, we may ask, why discussion boards? And the basis for a lot of the research I've done for this presentation comes from EDUCAUSE. EDUCAUSE, as you guys may know, is a nonprofit organization that's focused on, quote, intelligent use of technology in higher education. So I'm going to talk about 5 reasons why we need to think about discussion boards. And then we're going to walk through some problematic discussion board scenarios and some strategies that can kind of help you work through those scenarios. So the first reason why we need to think about discussion boards is in both an online and a face-to-face environment, that discussion board is really critical to community building. As you guys know, those of you who teach online or in the blended format, that discussion board serves as the same kind of space, the teaching area, as when you're teaching on ground and you walk into the classroom and you've got the whiteboard or the chalkboard or the projection board behind you and you're facing all of those students. It's that opportunity to present materials, to involve the class in discussion, to ask certain, students to respond to questions. You get a real good gauge for, who the talkative students are, who the shyer students are. The students that perhaps are sitting on that back row who don't want to talk up a lot. The same kind of thing happens in the online environment, and you figure that out by paying really good attention to what's going on in the discussion board. So another reason we need to think about discussion boards is because in the blended instructional environment, discussions serve as a way to get students to interact with the course content. So instead of students just reading material, let's say in an ebook or in a hardback book, or even watching presentations that are created in Adobe, in Activate, we don't know what they're really taking away from that content until we get them to the discussion board, because then we can gauge, what their level of understanding is. What are they taking away from the material? What do they not understand? And, as you guys know, as seasoned educators, that can sometimes vary. There may be maybe one concept in a particular week that everybody's having trouble with. And there are good ways that you can kind of address that on the discussion board. But there may also be times where there are certain pockets of students who are having trouble with particular concepts, students who are at different levels, not only with the technology, but with understanding the concepts that are going on for that particular week in the classroom. And so again, that discussion board lets you figure out how they're interacting with that material and how you can help them to better understand that material. So the third reason why discussion boards are so important in the online environment is because discussion boards can facilitate classroom discussions beyond that face-to-face time, and this is really important in that blended environment. So if you have face-to-face class time with the students, and as many of us know, sometimes you run out of time. You don't get to fully explore a topic because students have had a lot of questions, or maybe the discussion gets off on a tangent which is related to, but you didn't cover all of the maybe 5 or 6 main items that you wanted to. That discussion board can give you that platform so that you can continue the discussion. You can further that discussion and deepen the back and forth. It's also a good way to introduce ideas before the class meetings happen. So the discussion board may be like a proving ground where you talk about a main concept, you direct students to resources, and then in your face-to-face time, if you're in that blended environment, maybe that's where you only answer the questions with the knowledge that students come really prepared and really prepped with that information. So let's look at another reason, reason number 4. Discussion boards can also engage students in course content continuously throughout the course. Now, my teaching background is in composition and literature. I've taught both on ground and online, and I have to say, when I compare those two experiences as an instructor side by side, I do like teaching online mainly for this reason. Because if I have a student's attention, let's say once a week, twice a week, for an hour, for a really short amount of time, sometimes I don't get them as engaged, and I don't know that they stay engaged in the material for the whole time that I have them. And I certainly don't know that they're paying attention and engaged in the material for the entire week. However, on the discussion board, because I can do outreach to them via email, I can talk to them on Google Chat, there's different ways that I can contact them. I can post announcements in the announcement area of the course, and I can kind of prod discussion at different times during the week. I know that they're going to be more engaged in what's going on. And so for a class, let's say, that's really, as a whole, really on top of their game, they're really reading the material, they really have a lot of questions, they're really getting a lot out of the material. Well, through the week, I can pose probing questions to them to, almost get them to that, I don't want to say extra credit level because they're not going to earn extra points, but they're going to get additional learning because they're interacting with each other more. Now, for instance, with this another class, let's say that class personality, they're a little bit, let's say, technology shy, they're unsure about the content, they're a little slower to respond as a class that weekly time on the discussion board, because the discussion board is that asynchronous component where people post at different times throughout the week. I can kind of guide them along and point them to specific maybe pages in the textbook they need to read, maybe PDFs that I have posted in the class, different areas to kind of help them stay engaged. Whereas if I were teaching the same class on ground, they may skip that week entirely, and that would really provide a setback for them. So let's look at the final reason why discussion boards are so important. And I think this is really key, and that is learning is not a spectator sport. Students must talk about what they're learning, they must write about it, they must relate it to past experiences, and they must apply it to their daily lives. They've got to get in there and they've got to work with the ideas. They have to explore those ideas, they have to talk to each other about those ideas, they have to ask questions about those ideas, and then they have to figure out how are these ideas relevant to me, relevant to my experiences now and what I plan to do in the future. So now that we've talked about some reasons why discussion boards are so important in the online environment, I want to shift gears and talk about some best practices. So, we talked about how the discussion board can help you gain insight into what your students have learned, what questions they may have, kind of where they are in understanding the material on a week-to-week basis. But now I want to talk about these 3 best practices that pretty much I've observed over the years. The first one is Instructor Presence. The second one is providing effective feedback. And number 3 is planning for scenarios. We're going to take each one of these in turn and really kind of explore how these best practices can be demonstrated and kind of utilized within the classroom. Does anyone have any questions before we start talking about the best practices? I don't see any hands up. As you guys know, you can use the, on the participant panel, there's a handy little icon where you can click on the hand. Yeah, Joy says, don't be shy. Yeah, don't be shy. Well, if you happen to have any questions, as I said, just throw them in the chat box, raise your hand, and I'll be happy to stop, and we can kind of explore those questions and those ideas. So the first best practice I want for us to think about is instructor presence. Now, instructor presence is one of the cornerstones of good online teaching, not just for the discussion board, but just really across the board if you're teaching an online class. It's most keenly felt on the discussion boards because if a student is in an online classroom and the instructor is not on the discussion board, they're going to feel like they're pretty much in a self-paced class all by themselves. They're going to feel super isolated. They're not going to feel a connection to the other students. They're certainly not going to feel a connection to the material. So that instructor presence really gives you an opportunity to personalize what's going on in the classroom. And really, I have found, in my experience, it's best to do this from day one. And you can personalize your classroom in so many different ways. You can post a picture of yourself. You can do voice recordings, audio welcomes for your class. You can do that on a weekly basis and introduce them to the weekly topics that they're going to be tackling for that week. The instructor presence also allows you to establish the tone for the class. On the discussion board, if you use a really professional yet friendly and approachable tone in how you respond to students, that's going to put them more at ease. That's going to help them feel like that they have a connection to you, to the other students, and to the material. The instructor presence also helps to set the standard for the students, because one of our best practices that we talk about at Kaplan is that we encourage our instructors to be the first person to post on the weekly discussion boards, to really model for the students how they want those discussion board responses to look. And by that I mean they address the students by first name, they use a proper salutation, they're of course using good grammar, capital letters, ending punctuation, they're giving very specific kind of information in their discussion board posts, and they respond to different students. They don't just have a one-on-one conversation with one student, they talk to different pockets of students, maybe address the whole student classroom. As a group, they really vary how they respond on the discussion boards. And by doing that, you're setting that expectation for how you would want the students to interact on the discussion boards. Instructor presence also helps you build community within the classroom, because if there's a strong leader, if there's a person in the classroom, then the students are going to feel, like I said, so much more comfortable with the material, with what's going on in the classroom. And they're going to be more encouraged to respond on that discussion board, to be, posting early in the week, posting midweek, posting toward the end of the week, and really getting so much more out of that interaction. And finally, your instructor presence strengthens your credibility, because it shows to your students not only that you're committed to their learning and their learning activity, but that you really know what you're talking about, that you're an expert in your field and they can really learn something from you. So another best practice for the discussion board that's related to the instructor presence, it's really, you have to think about what your presence depends on, and that includes posting consistently throughout the academic week. really try to avoid being, just posting at the front end of the week or doing it kind of a last-minute afterthought at the end of the week, because from week to week, students are going to pick up on that. And they're going to think, well, okay, if the instructor doesn't have to post but, once a week on the discussion boards, well, I don't either. And, of course, that's going to hurt their grade. That's going to hurt their overall learning. Make sure you also post consistently throughout the term. So make sure that you don't have maybe a strong week in week 1 or week 2 or toward midterms or toward the end of the term. Really try to be consistent in how active you are on the discussion boards throughout the term. And that helps ensure that the students have a really good experience. And again, you can further the discussion that started in the face-to-face classrooms when you extend those to the asynchronous discussion boards. So another best practice is about feedback. And when we're training brand new faculty at Kaplan, one of our tenets is we talk about sandwich feedback. And sandwich feedback is when you begin with positive reinforcement. I always like to thank the student for submitting their work. If something really stood out to me, if they had something really creative, they really hit the nail on the head for a particular aspect of what we're looking for on the rubric, I always start out with that. You did a good job with, and I'm very specific. We encourage our instructors to do the same thing. Start with that positive reinforcement. Then sandwich in the constructive information. So you could say, while you did a great job with your introductory paragraph and you had a strong thesis statement, be sure you take a look at your transitional sentences. For instance, if you were grading, let's say, a composition paper. Maybe the concluding paragraph was a little bit weak. The middle section is where you would share that with the student. And then you want to end with a note that encourages. You could say something like, I look forward to seeing your next submission. I would love to see a new draft of this paper. I know you'll do great on the next assignment. Always let them know that you're looking forward to their future accomplishments. That really helps reinforce their confidence that they can do the work that we're asking them to do in the classroom. And another best practice is really planning for scenarios. I've been involved in training new instructors for a pretty good while, and I have to say that brand new instructors to the online environment, and sometimes even seasoned online instructors, they kind of get thrown for a loop sometimes if a scenario happens live in their classroom that they're completely unprepared for. It could be a situation that they haven't even thought of, certainly one they've never encountered, maybe one they've never even heard of. And so we have found that it's helpful to talk about different kinds of scenarios that can happen in the classroom, because just as in the on-ground classroom, in the online classroom, if you get a certain combination of personalities, maybe you have different students that are under various kinds of stress, there's just different interactions, people that just kind of set each other off a little bit, that can express itself on the discussion boards. And if you think about these scenarios ahead of time and plan ahead for how you could respond to them, that really kind of takes away the stress level for you as an instructor. Lynn, yes, Lynn says positive, positive, positive is so important for us to remember as educators. Absolutely. And I would add to that being very clear in our feedback. It's one thing to be positive and say something that's broad, and here I'll click back to that since we're talking about the sandwich. We could be positive but be vague and say, oh, you did a good job on this term paper. I really like what you did here. That's positive, but it's really so vague as to be almost useless because we haven't told them what they've done well, specifically what they've done well. And so they're really unprepared to replicate that kind of success for the next paper, the next assignment that they turn in. But if we can be positive and provide the clarity and say something like, you did a good job with your thesis statement because it pointed to ideas that you brought up in your body paragraphs, then that's so much better because it's positive, yes, but it also tells them exactly what they accomplished, what they, hit the nail on the head as far as what the rubric is looking for, and how they can do that again for the next time. So yeah, good point there. So we were talking about the scenarios. It's a good idea to think about these scenarios, kind of plan ahead, have a plan of action in mind so that if they happen, we aren't taken aback. And we'll look at some very specific scenarios here. So here's a scenario, and this is the slow discussion board. This is the discussion board topic that maybe the students think the topic's not that interesting, nobody's posting, several days have passed in the week and nobody's posting, nothing's happening on the board. And so as an online instructor, it's hard to know exactly what the hang up is. Sometimes it could be timing. If it happens, let's say, during midterms, it could be that students are taking other classes. They're kind of pulling at their time. Maybe they have a really intensive project that's due in another class. And so they're not being as responsive on this particular discussion board. And if we've been paying attention to their discussion board activity throughout the term, we'll know that this is just an anomaly for that particular week, right? But if we see slow discussion boards happen all the time, there's some things that we can do to kind of help. And one of those is to verbally mention the discussion board topic in class. And so if you have a live synchronous component to your online classroom, that's a perfect opportunity. If you have a face-to-face on-ground component, again, that's a perfect opportunity to say to your students, hey, don't remember, this week's discussion board topic is about XYZ. I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys think about topic ABC. Be sure you log in and post to the discussion board. It may just be that they need some sort of reminder. You can also do this with course announcements, with a little email reminder if you want to tweet something out, if you want to do reminders on chat, however you interact with your students on those back channels. You also may need to ask for understanding. It could be that the discussion board topic is so convoluted, maybe it has various parts or sections, and the students just don't know how to get started. This is a good opportunity for you, again, to demonstrate that good teaching practice by being the first one to post, and that's what I have here for number 4. If you post first, and let's say that you're teaching a class and the discussion board topic perhaps is already written for you, it's already part of the class, you can't really change it, but you can help students understand and build that bridge for them by making that very first post. And so you could say, the first question we have here is about talking about different art forms in medieval times. Here are some resources that you may want to look at, and you could just post right there some URLs for them to go and look at, point them in the right direction. Make a suggestion about what you're looking for. Break it down into chunks so that they know what kind of steps they need to follow. You can also start a debate with students. It could be that they think, well, the topic's not very interesting, I don't really know what to do. You could play devil's advocate and say, well, what if you met someone who took this position that believes in XYZ? What would you say to him or her? How's that connected to this week's discussion board topic? Let's see, Nikki says, do you train the online TAs along with newbie online instructors, especially at the graduate level? Well, Nikki, at Kaplan University, we don't have teaching assistants. All of our instructors teach our classes. That didn't come out right. All of our instructors are either full-time instructors or adjunct instructors. We do not have teaching assistants. So everybody we teach, everybody we train is an instructor, is a faculty member. Let me know if that helps to clarify. Yeah. I would have to say though, if we were at a place where we did have graduate students and we were teaching TAs, we would probably teach them exactly the same thing. We would guide them toward the same kinds of things because we're thinking about student outcomes, right? So for that slow discussion board, you could start a debate. You could provide a reflection. Depending on what that topic is, you could share a personal experience. Students love when we personalize ourselves in the classroom. And we talk about maybe our own learning experiences when we were in exactly their space. And we could say, I remember when I was a student in an economics class, I had a hard time with this topic. This is what helped me. You can also do a follow-up at the end of the week and just say, just summarize for them. This is what our main topics were. This is what we should have learned this week. Are you guys ready for next week? So another scenario that can happen, here I've got my railroad tracks, is that your discussion board topics can perhaps get off the rails, And this happens, I found this happens a lot of times with students that are super excited. They've got a lot of ideas, they really love to share them, they're really comfortable in the online environment, but they get a little bit off topic. They start talking about, you know, what happened lately on America's Got Talent or a baseball game. You know, they get a little bit off track. And some of that, I have to say, yeah, you're still seeing the snails? Let's see. Thanks for letting me know, Lynn. I may have clicked the wrong thing. Okay, good. Does everybody see my rails? Running off the rails. You guys let me know if you're seeing the slide that says scenario off topic. Okay, great. Thanks for letting me know, Joy and Lynn. So for these students, I was going to say, sometimes if students get really involved and they get a little bit off topic, sometimes that's okay because it's a sign of community building and they are interacting with each other and it shows that they're interested in the class. If your classroom has a provided cafe area or student lounge discussion board, you could gently remind them that that's the place where they need to post those kinds of things. Generally speaking, those aren't graded. It's just kind of a hangout space for them, and that's where they can have those off-topic conversations. If you see it happening on the main discussion boards for that week, you can restate the main idea. Just gently prod them just like you would face-to-face and say, hey, we're actually talking about this week, we're discussing, you know, a short story. What do you guys think about this particular writer? What do you guys think about this particular topic? If you see that some students are off topic and other students are on target, you can restate those other students' comments. So you could say something like, I see that Susan and Mark have some good ideas about Robert Frost's poem, The Road Not Taken. I really like how they see some symbolism here. What do you guys think about that? So you're kind of adding to that conversation that is staying on track. You can ask for some interpretations of the topic. Again, you're pointing them back to that main idea. You can ask someone in the group to refocus the discussion. If you have someone who really likes to take the reins and they love to post, you can just ask them. You know, Jack, what do you think about this particular short story? Give us your ideas. And if it's all right with your academic leadership team, if you don't have an area for students to talk and chat with each other, see if you can provide students with that, with the Cyber Cafe. Exactly. Yep. And the Cyber Cafe, especially for first-term students, students who are brand new to the learning environment, they usually love that opportunity because it allows them to network with their friends and talk about, you know, their kids, or maybe they've not been feeling well lately, or they've had trouble at work. You know, whatever they would share, you know, in the hallway in an on-ground classroom, they share in that Cyber Cafe. So another scenario that you may see that happens sometimes is what I call parallel play. Those of you guys who have experience with younger children, with toddlers, you guys know that there's a stage where instead of interacting with each other, they play side by side. They get really involved in their own games, but they're not interested in sharing. Well, this kind of behavior can happen on the discussion boards. And this is where students are diligently posting. They're on topic. They're not slow, they're very timely, but they're not interacting with one another. And sometimes this happens with students who are brand new to the online discussion boards. They haven't really fully realized that the discussion board is actually a public area. They may visualize it as a private conversation between themselves and you as the instructor. So they look at the discussion board topic as a question you've asked them, and they're going to post their response to you. And so for that, it may be a good idea to just give them a refresher about just a general statement about how the spaces of the classroom work. The discussion board is an open space. It's like talking out loud in a classroom with everybody sitting in chairs in a circle. And so if I ask everybody a question, I expect everyone to give some sort of response. So that kind of response, that kind of reminder may help students. You may see this behavior when students don't respond to their classmates, even if their classmates post back to them. They may they may ignore that. They may not understand that, depending on how the rubric is structured, that, they're graded on responding to their classmates. They're not just graded on their response back to the main topic. And sometimes you may see that they clamor for your input. And I see this sometimes with brand new instructors. Some new instructors feel like they have to respond to every posting by every student on every discussion board. Now at KU, our best practice is in week 1 we have an Introduce Yourself discussion board where all the students have to introduce whatever they feel comfortable sharing. Generally where they're located, what they're studying, their interesting hobbies, backgrounds, that kind of thing. And for that discussion board, our instructors do have to respond to all students and make them feel warm and welcome. But for the subsequent weekly discussion boards, week to week, unit to unit, you generally don't want to do that because you don't want to dominate the discussion board. You don't want it to be your show. You want it to be the students' show because they will learn as much, if not more, from their interaction with each other as they will from interaction with us as the instructor. So you may see that as, they're kind of clamoring and looking for that attention. So you may say, well, gosh, what can I do about that? Oh, let's see, we have a comment. I have lots of trouble figuring out how to use discussion boards in my foreign language classes because the vendor includes DBs as part of the coursework. And so there's a built-in static view of DBs as a place to give an answer and you're done. Ooh, not much interaction takes place. What kind of platform are you using, Jose? Some of it does depend on, okay, you're using Aveda is the vendor. Jose, I have in the long distance past used discussion boards in Blackboard. There may be some new upgrades that perhaps your institution can provide training or they already have training, and that way that may help you, filter what you're seeing on the discussion board. But it sounds like in terms of how the students are using the discussion board, you could still be that mediator. You could still be the one to post first on the discussion board and invite additional interaction. And you can do that by addressing the students by their first name, their preferred name, asking them very specific questions, and I'll give you some other scenarios here in just a bit. But it could be that if you jump in at the beginning of the discussion, and if they just come in and just post and leave, hit and run, you can still post and say, hey, you had a great idea with your response to, XYZ. What do you think about this? What would you do in this kind of scenario? Or what are some examples you're doing? You mentioned that you're doing the foreign language class. You could ask them to maybe give some, use a little creativity and give some examples, some anecdotes about that would connect what they're learning to the real world environment. And that may help them get more interactive with each other. And there's another technique that I'll explore and explain in just a bit. It's called weaving, where you help the students build by talking back and forth to each other. It's almost like you're a host. So yeah, stay tuned for that. Nikki says, how do you grade those responses beyond the initial discussion post? Nikki, that's really going to depend upon the rubric that's attached to your class. At Kaplan, when we build courses, we do that with subject matter experts who are experts, veteran teachers for that particular topic, and they work with our course designers. And during that process, the syllabus and the rubrics are created. And we have a committee that approves it. We have a very formalized process. But by the time an instructor is assigned to teach a class, everything in the class is already built, plus the rubric is already there. And so the rubric is going to guide you on how you grade. Some of the classes that I have taught require students to not only respond to the main topic, but also respond to their classmates. So it's, for those classes, it's built into the rubric. So it's to their benefit to follow along with, you know, the guidance that I'm providing them on the discussion board. Let's see, Lynn, that happens in my LOTE class as well. I use Aventa. I add ones about culture items that can interest them more. There you go, absolutely. Sometimes I even get sensible paragraphs. Oh, good, wonderful. So let's talk, we're talking about parallel play. Let's look at some techniques to help break them out of their discussion. One thing that you can do is to acknowledge students who have similar ideas and then group them together. And here's a sample posting. So let's say Jim responded to the discussion board topic, and then Susan over here responded to the discussion board topic, but they're not talking to each other. You can make a post like this that says, Jim and Susan, you both did a great job in analyzing the pre-writing steps. I see you both agree that pre-writing is an important part of the writing process, and you could follow that up with another leading question. What other parts of the writing process do you think are crucial to creating, you know, a well-rounded draft? See, in that way, by addressing Jim and Susan both, chances are high that they're both going to read that posting that you made, and in the course of the conversation, you'll get them to talk back and forth to each other. Another technique that you can use is, and these are general techniques that can work for any kind of scenario. One is called Deepening the Dialogue. As you know, students are sometimes, they come to us, they're nervous, they're shy, they're not sure how to proceed. They may have really good ideas about the topic, maybe they're uncomfortable with the technology, or vice versa. Maybe they're really well versed with the technology, they're not so sure about the topic itself. If you can make those connections between the students and the content and the students and their classmates, it can really help them get to that place where, like Jose said, they're not just posting and running, where they're really getting into that good discussion, just like most of us have probably experienced in the on-ground classroom, where you go beyond just question and answer and you really start to discuss ideas. You start to use that critical thinking. This can help them provide a new perspective. You want to make sure that you make it clear that you're going to honor multiple perspectives, that you're having a professional discourse within the classroom. You know, it's not a race, it's not a debate, it's a discussion of critical thinking. And you can help them find those patterns and explore those common beliefs that they may have. And you can do that by asking those follow-up questions, checking on the discussion board. And it may not be a very long and involved kind of question, but it's a way for you to kind of make those, connect the dots between the students. So another technique that I like to use is called piggybacking. And this is where you respond to the original post and then you amplify an aspect. So you're kind of, you know, calling attention, putting a spotlight on one good idea the student had, and you're inviting follow-up comments. By this, you're doing a chain that connects the student's post. So you could say something like, you know, Juliet, you had a really good idea about the importance of the thesis statement. You're right that the thesis statement provides guidance for the rest of the paper. What does anyone else think about the thesis statement? Would you like to share your thesis statement of the next draft that we're all working on? Let's see how strong your thesis statements are. And here, when you start piggybacking, because you're inviting those comments, it's crucial that you provide that follow-up, because the impetus for them to respond to your initial question is that you're going to come back and give them even more feedback. So you're really creating that back and forth kind of discourse that you want to happen. here's another technique, and this is a weaving technique that I was mentioning just a minute ago. So weaving is where you identify unifying themes between students' posts. You add positive reinforcing feedback. So maybe you see 3 or 4 students that all are on the same kind of path, the same kind of idea in response to a question. You can make one post, you can name all 4 of those students: Jack, Juliet, Charlie, and Susan. I see that all 4 of you have some good ideas about fill in the blank. You're naming them. You may also want to point out, you let them know what they've done well. You guys did a great job thinking about possible meanings about the 2 paths in the woods in Robert Frost's poem. However, you guys may want to think about the author's background. How could that be connected to the poem? So you're telling them what they've done well, and then you're pushing them to think more deeply. You're weaving together their comments. And again, you always want to end with an invitation. You know, what do you guys think about Robert Frost's background? How does that have an impact on the poetry that he writes? What does it have to do with perhaps the setting or the tone of his poems? What does everybody else think? I always like to open it up for the rest of the class. What does everybody else think about this? And don't be afraid to summarize. If you find that you have a fairly lengthy discussion board posting, keep in mind that most students are probably not going to read posts that are a paragraph or too long. Use those bullet points. Use those formatting tools that are probably available to you on your discussion board platform. Use different fonts. Use different font colors. Use highlighting. Use things in italic. Really call things out, the main ideas that you want them to walk away with. So weaving is another technique to help you break out a discussion. If you see students are kind of chugging along by themselves, but they're not talking to each other. And here's a sample response that you could do back to a small group of students. Terry, Mark, and Susan, you've all mentioned that you enjoy free writing as your favorite pre-writing technique. So they've all individually posted that in response to the discussion board question. What do you all think are some reasons why free writing works so well? So see that I've asked them an open-ended question. I didn't ask them a yes or no question. So that helps avoid kind of the post, the hit and run, post and run, because I've asked them a more in-depth question. Are there pre-writing situations where you use another type of pre-writing? So maybe they use free writing for longer, more involved projects, but maybe they do something else entirely for something that's a little more structured, maybe something that's a science project or an IT project. And see, by asking these kinds of questions, you know, chances are high that specifically Terry, Mark, and Susan, when they see their name on the discussion board in your response, they're going to click on that. They're going to read that. They're probably going to respond. But then the other students are going to get curious. Oh, well, what did Terry, Mark, and Susan all have in common? I wonder what they all said. And they're going to get involved in that conversation as well. So we've talked about how you may be faced with a situation where the discussion board question is pretty well set in stone. You know, it's part of the curriculum. There's really not anything you can do. You can't go in and edit that question. For those situations, you can still act as that intermediary, act as that bridge. And you can do that by reframing the question for the students. And again, you have to be the first one to post, provide that kind of filter so that students better understand how to approach that discussion board question. Make the question relevant to them. And so if the preset question is a little bit lofty, maybe it's a little bit theoretical, take that core idea but then break it down into scenarios. How would this apply in this kind of situation? Have you experienced this kind of thing in your past professional experiences? There's all kinds of ways that you can make those connections for the students. Again, if you're teaching in a face-to-face scenario, in a hybrid class, use that as a way to extend that face-to-face conversation. And that happens just so naturally because you could say, as we were discussing in class on Wednesday, we talked about nature poetry, and we talked about narrative poetry. How do you think those two categories are good descriptions for Robert Frost's poem? you can just easily kind of extend and pull out those questions that happened in the face-to-face environment. Let's see, Nikki says, how long is too long and how short is too short with respect to the discussion posts? Well, Nikki, that's really going to vary from class to class and from student to student and depending upon your curriculum. I would say a good rule of thumb is if you have a long paragraph of text, generally online that's tiring to the eye, just like in PowerPoint it's tiring to the eye, try to break it down into bullet points so that students can more easily digest and understand that information. So you can extend the face-to-face conversation. You want to ask students to relate the questions to their experiences, ask those good open-ended questions, and again, provide resources. Point students to very specific resources that can give them the tools so they can better respond to that discussion board question. And that could be resources that are within your classroom. If you have a sharing area within your classroom, like doc sharing, that's provided in the eCollege platform, or maybe resources that are provided by your institution. Lucy and Nikki says, and what points are points taken off? I guess you're asking about in terms of grading the discussion board posts. Nikki, again, that's going to really depend upon the rubric that's attached to the classroom. I don't want to, give kind of a specific answer because it depends on the course material you're teaching, it depends upon your institution, and then again, it really depends upon that rubric. So another scenario that can happen is a heated exchange, or commonly called the flame war online. And again, if you have a class that is comprised of some very strong personalities, or perhaps you're discussing topics that can really polarize students, there's different ways that you want to think about how you want to handle the heated exchange. Sometimes students, and this can happen to experienced students as well as newbie students, sometimes they respond very emotionally to a strong topic. So they're not, they're not thinking through, they're not providing background material or source information. It's just an off-the-cuff kind of comment. They may post quickly without thinking, just kind of a knee-jerk reaction. And sometimes you may find that they will respond in class as they would respond to friends. So they may be just very informal. They may use language that's not acceptable. They may use terms that are not acceptable. And that's a good space for you to reinforce the idea of the formal classroom space versus the informal Facebook chat room, Google chat space, which is different. And so that's good to establish at the very first beginning of the term. So some strategies for that heated exchange would include, for posts that are clearly out of line, where there's name calling, it's harmful, some things that you may want to think about is to copy and paste to the discussion board into a Word document. Make sure that you've got the student name and the timestamp included, just so you have some documentation. You may want to remove the offensive post to discourage copycats, because you don't want it to end up being kind of a pile-on where, the whole class divides into two camps and one person agrees with Susie, one person agrees with Mark. It just, destroys that classroom kind of collegial environment that you want to have happen. And you probably need to contact your academic leadership team for any next steps. Chances are they're already going to have a policy in place that's going to be very specific about the steps that you need to take, what needs to happen next. If you contact the student, if student affairs gets involved, if your deans get involved, all those kinds of things. At the very least, you should always contact your department chairperson so that they could provide guidance and be that good listening ear. The main thing is to try to get everybody back on track and back on topic, because most students, even the ones that get involved in this, they're going to tire of it quickly, but they may not know how to go back to that professional, formal tone in the classroom, and you can provide that guidance for them. So some of your strategies would include, after you've kind of put out that initial forest fire, go back and see that discussion with a model post. Help them, gently guide them back on track. Remind them what the topic is. Show them how they're supposed to respond to each other. And if you're comfortable, you could even say, you know, this topic really, you know, everybody really cares about this. It's really touched off a really good discussion. Let's make sure, though, let's review our classroom etiquette rules. There's a way that you can kind of bridge the gap for the students. So you want to remind them about the rules, remind them about their need for professionalism, that they want to be as professional in class as they expect to be in the workplace. Remind them about the expectation about being respectful to everyone. And again, as I mentioned, for posts that are out of line, you want to get rid of the hurtful exchange and contact your academic leadership. So I see that we've got just a few more minutes left, so we will wrap it up here. This is my last scenario. So this scenario is about having multiple topics. So this may be an outcome of having a discussion board topic, again, that you don't have any control over, but there's multiple things going on. They want them to post on maybe 3 different ideas, or maybe there's one main idea and there's sub-ideas, but there's sections. There's more than one idea going on for that discussion board. And it's easy sometimes for students to get off track, to get confused. Certainly, what I've seen happen most often is that students will respond to one of those topics and they will completely bypass everything else that's going on. Here, your job is really to be the coach for the students. So where there are multiple topics presented in the discussion board header, it's really crucial for you to participate. Really jump in there. Kickstart that discussion with a model post. Break it down for the students. Tell them, first you want to do this, then you want to do that, and third you want to do this. Break it down so they know step by step by step. Maintain that consistent presence. So it may be that in the middle of the week you say to everyone, hey, looks like everybody's done a good job in responding to topic 1, but don't forget, come back and respond to topic 2 and 3. You really want to encourage the discussion because they may start off with a bang and do really well on that first 1 or 2 topics, but you need to encourage them and push them a little bit to finish up. Remind them perhaps that, you know, in order to gain full credit for this discussion board, you have to respond to all aspects, all questions that are asked. And you can always invite them to ask you questions, you know, contact you via email. If there's an instructor discussion board question area within the classroom, that's a good place for them to post general questions and all those sorts of things. So that's the last scenario that I had. These are my references. And feel free to contact me if you would like additional information. My email address is mcartwright@kaplan.edu. And if anybody has any questions now, I'd be happy to answer those as well.
I'm going to let you type those questions in the chat while I move through the conclusion portion of the slide. There are book discounts available through the conference, which is fabulous. This recording of Marla's presentation, which was so helpful on discussion boards, will be available starting tomorrow, and it will be available through July 2014. And just by attending this conference today or this session today, you automatically receive credit for it. You don't have to do anything. Everything is automatically sent to you. If you view this later for credit, watching it recorded, you will need to then go ahead and select your name to receive all that credit. Marla, again, thank you so much for presenting and taking the time to share with us today about discussion boards. We so enjoyed having you. Donda, thank you for closed captioning and for getting all that for us. That's a tough job, and you did a great job. I am going to have to scoot quickly, but Marla, again, thank you so much.
Well, I just want to thank everybody at the conference for the opportunity. I love talking about, you know, teaching online and different strategies. Again, if anybody would like to touch base, I'll put it back to the contact slide here. Flip it back. feel free to email me. I'd be happy to, to continue this discussion or to do some brainstorms or, provide resources. It would be great to be able to do that. So I hope everybody has a great rest of your Friday afternoon, and thanks so much, everybody. Bye, y'all.
Same to you, Marla. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend.